Hello, bros. We're back with another book. I was going to keep with my pattern of finishing one book, but why? Don't care. Don't care. So, we're going to start The 17-Mile Horror by Dick Gessler, which is, as you'll see, I'll just let him introduce himself in this book as he does. A novel by Dick Gessler, Holly Publications. You can see the few pages are falling out. 1981. Dick Gessler. I would like to dedicate this novel to my wife Vi, to my children Gary and Terry, to my mother and Holly. Dick Gessler was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. After graduation from Redford High School, he took a job as a meter reader for the Michigan Consolidated Company. After a few years, he was promoted to a job as a serviceman. His beat was the downtown area of Detroit, which encompassed the Skid Row section of town and the ghetto. Every night when he came home from work, he would have an interesting story to relate to his wife. One night, after telling her, and the page falls out, after telling her of a funny incident that happened to him that day, she told him, "You should write a book." This started him on his writing career. Mr. Gessler now resides in Plymouth, Michigan, and is employed as an experimental parts inspector for the Ford Motor Company. One day, after picking up a copy of the Detroit News, he noticed the headline, "Teenagers Take Over Heinz Park." The article went on to tell of teenagers frolicking in the nude in the many picnic and recreational sites in the park. Sex could be seen being performed out in the open. Drugs were dispensed freely. The local sheriff's department and the police were hard pressed to find a solution to the problem. Mr. Gessler decided that this would make a good background for a novel. Because of the unusual configuration of the large park, he decided to use this for the title of the novel. Thus, the 17-Mile Horror came about. Mr. Gessler has just completed his next novel and expects to have it out shortly. Sarah and Mariel stood at the foot of the staircase and looked up to the landing that overlooked the large viewing room. The door to the right at the head of the stairs was Ginny's room. Sarah looked at her friend, fear and anxiety written all over her face. Mariel was frightened to the point that her frail body was trembling. Sarah put her hand on the teakwood railing and slowly ascended the winding staircase. When she reached the landing, she stopped. There was a deathly silence in the large mansion. It was so quiet that Sarah could hear her heart beating. She looked at the door that had been closed to her these past 4 months. The horror that she had experienced behind that door came out to grip her once more. She started to walk toward the door, but found that her feet were frozen to the spot she was standing on. "I smell it," Muriel whispered. The sweet smell of flowers permeated the landing they were standing on. "I do too," Sarah answered. List of characters: Pete Worthington, the young undertaker of the small town of Plymouth, Michigan. Carl and Sarah Warren, the housekeeper and gardener of the old mansion that is turned into a funeral home. Sam Guthrie, the chief of police, who is forced to trap the young man whom he has known all of his life. Tony Russo, Pete's friend, who comes to visit Peter unexpectedly and finds strange and mysterious things going on in the old mansion. Pete's girlfriend, who is used as a decoy by Sam Guthrie to trap the killer. Bob Klein, the reporter, who wants an exclusive story on the Heinz Park killer and gets more than he bargained for. Dr. Schwartz, the psychiatrist, who reveals Ginny's secret to Sam Guthrie. Ginny Worthington, Pete's sister, who has sacrificed her entire life to raise the boy. Her love turns into a bitter hate, and she returns after death to seek her vengeance. Prologue, late March. The large carrion crow soared from its perch high atop an oak tree. Flapping its wings, it soon reached a height of about 50 feet. From this height, the bird started gliding in wide arcs. Below him, he could see the panorama of a small town on a busy Friday afternoon. Main Street was almost bumper to bumper with cars headed for the small downtown shopping district. The sidewalks also were crowded with people enjoying a warm spring morning. The bird swooped to its left, taking him over the Plymouth City Hall. Continuing its flight south, he was soon over the fountain in Kellogg Park. Seeing the water shoot up from the center of the fountain, then cascading into the pool, tempted the bird to swoop down for a drink. The number of people sitting on the park benches, enjoying the sunny, warm morning, frightened him, and instead he swerved to the right over Main Street, across the municipal parking lot, and over the trees that lined the side streets in town. The path of his flight took him over the roofs of the old mansions on Penniman Avenue. The bird then did a very strange thing. Instead of flying over the rooftops of the old homes, he would suddenly dive toward a rooftop, then just as suddenly swoop up into the sky, much as a dive bomber dropping its lethal cargo. After repeating this procedure on all the homes on the block, he once again soared skyward. The bird started slowly circling high above the tree-shaded street. He glided back over the same rooftops that he had dive-bombed before. It was as if he were searching for a certain house. When he reached the intersection of Penniman and Church Streets, he slowly turned to the left. Following Church Street, the large bird suddenly swooped upward and started circling again. Far below him was a large white mansion with 6 pillars that supported a portico. The bird dived again, coming to rest on the roof of the Worthington mansion. Cecil P. Worthington came to Plymouth, Michigan from Albany, New York in 1840. He was only 28 years old, but had already established himself as a shrewd businessman. He was only in town a few weeks when he opened the general store on Main Street. He brought with him from New York a large inventory of Paris fashions and various and sundry items that the good townspeople of Plymouth had never seen. He was soon doing a flourishing business. The well-to-do ladies were trying to outdo each other by purchasing the latest in fashions from Worthington's of Plymouth. He did so well in business that at the end of only 1 year, he decided to go into the banking business. Not wanting to abandon his lucrative store, he decided to remodel an abandoned storeroom at the rear of the building into a single teller's window and an office. He started making small loans to the farmers in the area. When word got out that a man had opened a bank in town, farmers and small businessmen from as far away as 100 miles came to see him. He was shrewd in all his dealings, demanding sufficient collateral for any loan that he made. On the other hand, he was very honest and understanding to the needs of the people of the community. He charged a very low interest rate, and on more than one occasion, when a farmer's crop had failed, he would grant the farmer an extension instead of foreclosing on him. This form of banking was frowned upon by the local business community. He was told by many influential people in town that he could not continue to operate if he persisted in being so liberal in his banking policies. He preferred to ignore the warnings of his fellow businessmen and continued to operate on the theory that his own personal feelings about a potential borrower plus some suitable collateral were all that was needed to obtain a loan. The people of that community soon found that they were able to come to him and discuss their financial problems. He treated each one as a friend and neighbor. Because of his understanding and honesty, he had very few customers that failed to repay their loans. On Saturday night, about a year after he had opened his bank, he attended the local square dance at Claude Johnson's farm. Being the most eligible bachelor in town, and there was no apostrophe on Johnson's, he had his pick of any girl at the dance. He had gone out to the large front porch for some fresh air when he noticed a young girl standing at the porch railing looking up at the full moon. Asked her who she was, and not he asked her who she was, not having seen her around town. She said her name was Liza Atkins. Her family had just purchased the Sutter's farm about 5 miles out, North Territorial Road. He remembered the name because her father had come into the bank and asked for a loan to purchase the property. He recalled that he had given Mr. Atkins the loan because he was able to come up with $990. Mr. Atkins bought the farm for $3,000, a sizable amount in those days. Knowing that the house and outbuildings were in good condition and that the Sutter's farm had a good tillable land, he did not hesitate in granting a loan of $2,100. He asked for the next dance. She was hesitant at first, not knowing that she had the most eligible bachelor in Plymouth in her arms. His charm and good manners soon overcame her misgivings, and they ended up dancing the remaining dances. Cecil P. Worthington was a man who knew what he wanted, and he wanted this black haired 19-year-old beauty for his wife. He began a whirlwind courtship that swept the young girl off her feet. After receiving permission from her father to court his daughter, he saw her every weekend for the next few months. He took her to all the fancy restaurants in and around Plymouth. Her favorite was the Mayflower Inn, located in the new Mayflower Hotel. They went to hayrides, picnics, and when an acting troupe from New York came to town, he took her to see her first play at the Penn Theater. One night, when they were enjoying a candlelight supper at the Mayflower, he proposed to her. She cried at first. Astonished by her reaction, he asked her what was wrong. She said that she always cried when she was happy. She dried her tears and accepted his proposal. He said that they would get married as soon as he could have a house built for her. She asked him if they could rent until the new house was finished. He smiled at her and told her that he wouldn't think of having his wife live in a house that had been lived in by another family. He told her that she could have any style house she chose. After giving it some thought, she decided on a style of house that she had grown up in. The type of home that she described was called Michigan Farmhouse. This type home was designed more for necessity than for architectural beauty. It was a 2.5-story house made of wood siding, mainly because wood was plentiful, you think, and inexpensive in Michigan. The initial home was about 20 foot wide and 20 foot long. The home had a half basement that was used mainly for storing canned goods, potatoes, and dried meat. This was the type of home that a young farm family built in those days. As the family increased in size, more rooms were added. It was not unusual to see as many as 6 rooms added to the original structure. This, then, was the home that young Cecil P. built for his wife. Needless to say, it was not the home that he had envisioned for his new bride. Not wanting to hurt her feelings, he agreed to build the home that she had described to him. He had, however, a few ideas of his own. He purchased an acre of prime land on the corner of Church and Harvey Streets. The property was only a block from downtown Plymouth and in one of the most exclusive areas of town. All around his property were the mansions of some of the most wealthy people of Plymouth. He commissioned a builder from one of the local mills to build his home for him. Instead of the 20 by 20 foot building that was considered a Michigan farmhouse, he added 40 feet to the rear of the building. The home had 4 bedrooms on the second floor. Each bedroom had a large stone fireplace, with stone delivered from Lake Michigan. He wanted hardwood floors, but she convinced him that pine would be sufficient. He imported velvet drapes from Italy. The curtains were lace and imported from France. Hand-cut glass chandeliers were placed in the living room, dining room, and sitting room on the first floor. He had a large, winding staircase built, going from the living room to the second floor. The railings were made of teakwood. He imported large oriental rugs that were placed in all the rooms of the house. Instead of the half basement, he had a basement that went the entire length of the home. They were to have 2 children, a girl named Kate and a boy named after his father, Cecil P. Jr. Died at the age of 25, a victim of influenza. Kate lived to the ripe old age of 93. She never married. She was born and died in the home that her father had built. After her brother died, the home was left to her. In 1928, she decided to modernize the large mansion. The original home had no front porch, as was custom in those days. Kate added a large portico with 6 pillars. On the east side of the home, she added a large bay window. To enjoy warm summer evenings, she built a large enclosed porch at the rear of the home. To set the home off, she had a black wrought iron fence built around the property. When she had finished with the improvements, the home was the showplace of Plymouth. Cecil P. Jr. married at the age of 23. He and his wife had 2 children before he died 2 years later. A boy named Cecil P. III moved into the mansion after his aunt died. After a few years in the old mansion, Cecil P. III married, and his new bride moved into the home. They had a girl named Genevieve and a boy named Cecil P. IV. The boy came late in the marriage, 15 years after Genevieve. Because of the difference in their ages, a provision was made in the will that in the event that both parents died, the girl was to care for her brother. When the girl was 25 and the boy was 10, the parents were both killed in a plane crash. Genevieve, or Ginny as she was now called, tried to be both a father and mother to her younger brother. With the help of an old English couple that her parents hired to maintain the large mansion, she managed to raise the boy. Ginny herself was not a healthy person. At an early age, it was discovered that she had heart trouble. She had restricted heart valve that she had a restricted heart valve that required constant medication. The use of the drugs that were needed to keep the valve open drained her of her energy. As a result, she was always fatigued. As she grew older, she depended more and more on Sarah and Carl Warren, the housekeeper and the gardener, to do the chores around the large mansion. Sarah and Carl were well into their 60s by now. However, they were made of stout stuff and performed their duties as if they were still in their 30s. Cecil P., or Pete, as he was now called, grew up to be a handsome boy. His 6 feet 2, 190-pound frame made him a natural for the football team at Plymouth Salem High. Although Pete was popular at school with all the guys, he never seemed to make out with the girls. It wasn't long before his friends started to notice this. When he was asked to double date or invited to a party with other couples, he always managed to come up with some feeble excuse. It wasn't long before the kids in school started calling him queer, pansy, and limp wrist. Pete's trouble could be traced directly to his sister Ginny. In her anxiety to protect the boy, she constantly reminded him that he should be careful around girls. In her opinion, the morality of the young people of today was disgusting. That was then. She came from the old school and believed that the man still had the dominant role in any sexual encounter. It was only natural that he felt the way he did. After all, his sister was a good person. She only wanted the best for him, so he obediently stayed away from girls. Jenny was left a small fortune from her father's estate. Since she had no other outlet to channel her interests, she joined various charitable organizations in town. She was a member of the Plymouth Garden Club, the Library League, and the Ladies' Sewing Club. One of her closest friends, and she had many, was R.J. Westwood. He was the local undertaker in Plymouth. After her parents' tragic death, he seemed to take an unusual interest in her. He at first attributed this to the fact that he felt sorry for her. After all, here was a girl with no parents trying to raise her brother all by herself. His feelings changed, however. He was now in love with the girl and had even proposed to her. Although Ginny felt the same toward him, she told him that she could never marry. Her father and mother had requested in their will that she raise the boy should anything ever happen to them. She felt obligated to carry out their wishes. This, in her mind, ruled out marriage. Although he was heartbroken by her refusal, he soon resigned himself to the fact that she had an obligation and intended to keep it. They became close friends. Ginny would often have dinner at the funeral home. She would take young Pete and they would go up the back stairs to the second floor living quarters. On these occasions, Pete would ask permission to look around the various rooms of the funeral home. At first, Ginny didn't feel it was a good idea for him to see a dead person. When he would persist, however, she would relent, and Mr. Westwood would take him on a tour of the home. He saw the embalming room, the chapel, and the storeroom where the caskets were displayed. Pete was fascinated. He asked Mr. Westwood if he could do odd jobs around the funeral home after school. With Ginny's permission, he would go over to the funeral home every night after school. At first, he was allowed to vacuum the carpet in the viewing room. When Mr. Westwood felt certain that he was not frightened by being around a corpse, he was allowed to clean up the embalming room. One night, when he was busy cleaning the instruments in the embalming room, Mr. Westwood wheeled the body into the room. He asked Pete to give him a hand in moving the body to the stainless steel embalming table. At first he was hesitant, but when Mr. Westwood assured him that it would be all right, he assisted him. When the body was on the table, he watched as the sheet was taken off the body. Before him, he saw the nude body of an old woman. He watched, fascinated, as Mr. Westwood made the small incision in the neck and inserted a small valve to the artery. The valve was connected to a long hose that connected to the embalming machine. He watched as the machine pumped the blood from the lifeless body into the stainless steel sink. At first, the odor almost gagged him. His fascination and his curiosity, however, overcame his revulsion. It wasn't long after that when he was allowed to help in the embalming process. After graduation from high school, Ginny wasn't surprised when he asked her if he could attend mortuary school. Ginny was surprised, however, when he asked her if he could open his own funeral home in the mansion. The idea of living above a funeral home didn't frighten her. She was more concerned with the idea of turning this fine old mansion into a business establishment. Pete kept after her and reminded her that, after all, it was his home too, and he didn't feel that his parents would mind if they knew that he had finally found something that he enjoyed doing. She finally relented and allowed him to remodel the old mansion. He used the basement for the embalming room and the lounge. The first floor was made into two viewing rooms and an office. He added a three-car garage to the rear of the mansion. He purchased a Cadillac hearse and a black van that he could use to pick up bodies from the hospitals. Mr. Westwood assisted him in purchasing the instruments that he would need. He was pleased that his young protege was starting his own business. Yeah, I'm sure he was pleased that he was taking his business from him. He had contemplated early retirement, all right, there we go, for some time now, since he felt that the town would be in good hands now that Pete was opening his own funeral home. He went ahead with his retirement plans. Inside the Worthington Funeral Home, Sarah was busy dusting the fireplace. When she was finished with the mantel, she turned around and walked over to a small end table on which was a bottle of window cleaner. My goodness, Miss Jenny, the mirror sure gets dusty. It was only yesterday I cleaned it. She was talking to a black-haired girl who was sitting at a dressing table across the large bedroom. The girl was in her 30s, and yet, when one looked at her closely, she had the appearance of a woman in her 50s. The eyes were sunken in their sockets. The bright blue had faded into a pale white film. The face was drawn as if in pain. Deep wrinkles creased each cheek. She wore a bright yellow dressing gown with a high lace collar. She looked at her pitiful image in the mirror as she was brushing her hair. I know, Sarah, if only I was able to do a little more, it would be so much easier on you. Now, Miss Jenny, don't you fret. I sure don't mind doing it. It won't be long now, and you'll be able to do for yourself. Dear, dear Sarah, Jenny almost whispered. You're so kind to say that, but I'll never be able to help you again. Sarah finished the mirror, put the glass cleaner on the end table, and walked over to a large canopied bed. She puffed up the pillows and pulled the embroidered bedspread over them. She turned and walked to the large bay windows on the east side of the bedroom. It's such a beautiful day out. I think you can use some fresh air. She opened the windows, looked out, and saw a black hearse pull up to the side entrance of the building. Miss Jenny, it's Master Pete. He's just now getting back from the funeral. Do you want me to ask him to come up and visit with you for a while? Sarah turned and looked at the girl seated at the dressing table. She had her hand up to her hair, brush still in hand. Sarah waited for Jenny to answer her. Nothing. The figure at the dressing table said nothing. A cold chill went up Sarah's back. Something was wrong. She could sense it. She walked slowly over to the She walked slowly over to the still figure seated at the table. Miss Jenny, I said that. When she reached the dressing table and looked in the mirror, she let out a shriek. Jenny's lifeless eyes were staring back at Sarah from the mirror. The hand still held the brush to her hair. Sarah fainted. Her unconscious body fell to the thickly carpeted floor behind the mistress. Pete had just stepped out of the hearse when he heard Sarah's cry coming from Jenny's bedroom. He ran up the stairs to the side entrance, threw open the door, and ran down the long hallway that led to the front room. When he reached the staircase that led to the second floor, he stopped. With a trembling hand, he gripped the railing and slowly made his way up the stairs. When he reached her bedroom door, he hesitated, then opened the door and walked into her room. He saw Jenny seated at her dressing table, brushing her hair, as he had seen her do so many times. When he saw Sarah lying on the floor, he immediately rushed over to her. Jenny, what happened to Sarah? Pete turned the old housekeeper over and started rubbing her arms. Jenny, what happened? Pete looked at the still figure at the table. No answer. Jenny, his voice became concerned. Answer me. What happened to Sarah? Just then Sarah regained consciousness. Master Pete, it's Jenny, she cried. It's Miss Jenny. Pete looked up from Sarah and walked over to his sister. He placed his hands on her shoulders and looked at her in the mirror. When he saw the lifeless eyes staring back at him, something in his mind snapped. He started rubbing his hands on her arms. His eyes stared at the image in the mirror. Now, Ginny, the voice was strange. It no longer was a man's voice, but the voice of a small child. Now don't you worry, Sarah's all right, aren't you, Sarah? Tell Ginny you're all right. The horrible scene that Sarah was witnessing paralyzed her with fear. She crawled on her hands and knees until she reached the door. She quickly opened it and ran down the stairs to the kitchen. Pete had picked out his best casket. It had teakwood sides. The top of the casket was bronze with strips of teakwood crisscrossing the entire length. The interior of the casket was lined in pure silk. It was a coffin purchased only by his wealthiest clients. The coffin was set up in the main viewing room. When word had gotten out that Ginny had died, the phone never ceased ringing. Words of condolence were expressed by her many friends in the small community. Florists started bringing large bouquets of every description. The east side of the viewing room where the coffin was displayed was soon overflowing with arrangements of every size. Although Pete didn't like to have a Sunday funeral, he felt that in this case, because of the many friends who had called to inquire about the arrangements, he would accommodate them and allow his beloved sister to be eulogized by as many of her friends as were able to attend. Sarah Warren was still distraught over the death of her mistress. A doctor had to be called in to administer a sedative after Ginny's death. The shock of seeing Ginny dead in the chair in front of her dressing table and the strange change that came over Pete had been more than her body could manage. The night after Ginny's death, she woke up in the middle of the night screaming. It was all that Carl, her husband, could do to convince her that she was only having a bad dream. She kept seeing those pale, lifeless blue eyes staring back at her from the mirror. On Sunday morning, the day of the funeral, Sarah managed to compose herself and get out of the bed that she had been in for the past few days. She was busy frying bacon when Carl came through the Dutch doors of the large kitchen. Why, Sarah, dear, you're up. I'm glad that you put this matter out of your head and that you're old. Why, Sarah, dear, you're up. I'm glad that you put this matter out of your head and that you're my old Sarah again. It's supposed to be you. You are. Old, you say? Why, you old codger, I can still work rings around the likes of ya. Now, Sarah, me pet, I was only teasing. Carl sat down at the kitchen table and unfolded a copy of the Plymouth Observer. He glanced at the headlines as Sarah reached for 2 eggs and broke them into the frying pan. It does my heart good to see that Miss Ginny had so many fine friends. It says here on the front page that they expect over 200 people to come to the funeral. Sarah set the. Why are they suddenly talking like fucking robots here? Sarah set the plate filled with bacon and eggs in front of her husband. She walked back to the stove and brought the coffee pot back to the table. She sat down at the table, took a sip of her coffee, and looked at her husband. Carl, where were you last night? Carl lowered the paper and looked at Sarah. Why, my dear girl, I came to bed right after I gave you the sleeping pill, don't you recall? Carl raised the newspaper, not wishing to look into the probing eyes of his wife. Carl, don't lie to me. Sarah pulled the paper from his hand. I woke up about 2 in the morning, and you know what? Carl looked at his wife, knowing full well that he could not deceive her. Well, if you must know, I helped Master Pete in the room. You mean, Sarah turned white, you helped him with Miss Ginny? Now, Sarah dear, don't get yourself all upset now. The boy was beside himself with grief. I had to help him. Sarah placed her head in her hands and started to sob. Carl looked across at his wife, not knowing what to say to console her. Suddenly, Sarah raised her head from her hands and looked at her husband. A look of horror crossed her face. What else happened last night? Her voice was almost a whisper. Sarah dried her eyes on a napkin and looked at Carl with piercing eyes. Right after I woke and found that you was gone, I heard footsteps. What do you mean, you heard footsteps? Carl stammered. Not footsteps that you hear going up or downstairs. These came from somewhere else in the house. Now, woman, what are you babbling about? If you heard footsteps, that was mine and Master Pete's walking around the house. These footsteps came from somewhere in the middle of the house, as if they was comin' from inside a wall. Just then the doorbell rang, and Carl got up to answer it, glad to get away from Sarah's questions. Carl walked down the long hall that led to the side entrance of the funeral home. Another bouquet for Miss Worthington, a young delivery boy, handed Carl a large assortment of flowers. Seems as though everyone from 100 miles around has been calling up to send a bouquet. We had to call the florist in Northville to get some more flowers. We're all sold out. She was well liked, Carl said as he took the flowers and walked back down the hall, past the kitchen to the main viewing room. As he passed the staircase that led to the second floor, he slowly turned and looked up at her room. He returned his gaze to the flowers he held in his hands. His face was ashen, drained of all color. He slowly walked into the viewing room, not looking at the coffin sitting in the center of the large room. He placed the bouquet on a flower stand to the far right of the room. He turned to walk back to the hallway when he felt something was not right. He turned and looked at the coffin. The coffin was closed. He walked slowly over to the coffin, reached for the lid, and started to raise it, then stopped. A look came over his face as if he suddenly remembered something. As he slowly lowered the lid, a hand grasped his shoulder. He quickly turned and looked directly into the haunting eyes of Pete Worthington. His face was a grinning mask. "Carl, Carl, my dear man," his soothing voice spoke as he put his arm around Carl's shoulders, apostrophe S, and walked him away from the casket. "It'll be all right. After all, we're doing this for Ginny, aren't we, Carl?" When they reached the hallway, Carl looked at the young man and said in a hoarse whisper, "Yes, Master Pete, we're doing it for Miss Ginny." Oh, Lord, what a cliffhanger that is. All right, we'll put this in there. What is this? An old, beautiful book thing. That's all, bros. That's all. That's just the prelude to Murders.